Well, we're back into history, and yeah. Remember yesterday I talked about, wow, you were flying through the air, and good times don't last if you're a Bruins fan. But during the regular season, they do. And this is an amazing team, 57, 14, and 7 overall, and pretty far ahead of the New York Rangers, who are 49, 18, and 11. So what gets lost is that points in between 1940 and 1994. The Rangers, pretty darn good team, but easy to forget and easy for fans to chant 1940, thanks to a team that isn't even on the board yet. But hey, Rangers are second that year. Montreal is third, 42, 23, and 13. Toronto is fourth and in the playoffs at 37, 33, and 8. Buffalo, their first year, 24, 39, and 15. Vancouver, their first year, 24, 46, and 8. Detroit, 22, 45, and 11. Now, before I look at the West, let's look at the East again. Boston, check. Rangers, check. Montreal, yep. Toronto, fine. Buffalo, yep. Vancouver's in the East. Yeah, see, the NHL had an alignment problem. They could have put Vancouver in the West and left Chicago in the East, but they knew they had a balance problem as well. So they moved Chicago to the West, and in their infinite wisdom decided Vancouver should be in the East. And this wouldn't be remedied for 5 years. Now, they play a balanced schedule. So because there's a balanced schedule where everybody plays everybody, I mean, really honestly, there shouldn't even be divisions at this point. It should just be 1 through 14. And as I've stated before, if the NHL was going to go to a 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15 system for their playoffs, which some people have advocated, that only works if you're playing a completely balanced schedule, which with 31 or 32 teams just isn't really possible. Then you're only playing every team twice, a few of them 3 times, and it's not really something that works particularly well because you don't really build a rivalry that way. Chicago, though, out west, dominant, 49, 20, and 9, followed by St. Louis at 34, 25, and 19, and St. Louis had to be kind of choked at the same time. Like, we got to the final 3 times in a row. With this division, if you added Vancouver to this division, we're still going to win it. And we could still go to the Stanley Cup final, but they also changed the Stanley Cup playoffs that year. Phillies 28, 33, and 17. Minnesota 28, 34, and 16. Followed by the Kings at 25, 40, and 13. Then the Penguins at 21, 37, and 20. And hey, look, the Oakland Seals have already renamed themselves the California Golden Seals. Or the California Seals, or whatever other name they wanted to use, because they went through a lot of name changes. I've got a Golden Seals history video on this channel, and I go through name changes and just the desperate attempt to make the Seals work. But 20, 53, and 5, it's not going to work with that kind of record. Vancouver's in the East for the first 5 years of their existence. So when people talk about, oh, Vancouver sucks, travel's never been their friend either. So the playoffs change. It's divisional, but only in round 1. But it's still 1 versus 3 and 2 versus 4 in each division. So that'll keep everybody nice and angry. The Bruins have the top 4 scorers in the NHL. All top 4 are Boston Bruins. First time that's happened. The Bruins set records of 57 wins, 121 points, and they score 399 goals. That's a total that won't be approached until the Oilers obliterate it in the 80s. Ken Dryden fills in for injured Rogie Vachon Felmire. All he does is win 6 regular season games and 6 appearances, and then go on to crush the dreams of every Bruins fan of a repeat before I'm even born yet, which is cruel. June 10th, 1970, the Seals trade Francois Lacombe and their first-round pick to the Habs for Ernie Hickey and the Habs' first-round pick. Now, what makes this even worse is, during the season, when it's obvious California is going to finish down here, LA looks like they might be close. Looks like LA might finish last. LA might get that number 1 draft pick. So the Habs, out of the kindness of their hearts, make trades to improve LA enough to ensure LA will finish ahead of the California Seals, thus securing their number 1 draft pick. Joe Sakic, if you're watching, keep it in mind. January 13th, 1971, Frank Mahovlich is traded to the Montreal Canadiens by the Red Wings. So the Big M is now with the Montreal Canadiens. And, yeah. Again, Toronto really should have found a way to keep him. He's a pretty darn good player. March 18th, 1971, Gilbert Perreault scores his 35th goal as a rookie, which is a record, and he ends up with 38 on the season. Hart Trophy. Bobby Orr of Boston, Art Ross, Phil Esposito of Boston. The Norris Trophy goes to Bobby Orr of Boston. The Calder goes to, of course, Gilbert Perreault of the Buffalo Sabres. So we'll start seeing new teams on the list of award winners now. The Vezina goes to Eddie Giacomin and Gilles Villemur of the New York Rangers. And the Lady Byng goes to Johnny Busick of the Boston Bruins. The Masterton goes to Jean Rattel of the New York Rangers. And the Conn Smythe goes to Ken Dryden of the Montreal Canadiens. The Patrick goes to William B. Jennings, John B. Sollenberger, and Terry Sawchuk for helping to grow the game in the U.S. Now, the number 1 draft pick turns out to be this guy named Guy Lafleur. So what the California Seals gave up was Guy Lafleur. Guy Lafleur, who would play in 1,126 games, score 560 goals, 793 assists, and get 1,353 points. He had 1 60-goal season, 6 50-goal seasons, which includes the 60, and 6 100-point seasons all in a row. Guy Lafleur, an amazing talent during the 70s, early 80s, and he would help to bring Montreal to more glory because that's what they needed. So, Guy Lafleur is a guy that we're going to be talking about a lot over the next week. And then we'll be talking about him again next week for different reasons. The first team All-Stars, Phil Esposito, Bruins. Ken Hodge, Bruins. Johnny Busick, also Bruins. Bobby Orr, Bruins. J.C. Tremblay, Montreal. And J.C. Tremblay is a guy who's not in the Hall of Fame, and there are some who think he should be. Eddie Giacomin in goal is your first team All-Star. Second team All-Star, Davey Keon of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's not going to be Maple Leaf for much longer. Yvonne Cornway of Montreal, Bobby Hull of the Chicago Blackhawks, Brad Park of the New York Rangers, Pat Stapleton of Chicago, and Jacques Plante, who's now playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So there's a Toronto-Montreal crossover with some players here, and Plante ends up being the second team All-Star for the NHL for the season. In the first round, Montreal and Boston's a bad matchup for Boston. I've mentioned that before, right? So yesterday, I talked about how Boston wins the Stanley Cup, Montreal misses the playoffs. This year, Montreal makes the playoffs, plays Boston in the first round, and beats them in 7. The New York Rangers beat Toronto in 6. The Chicago Blackhawks beat Philadelphia in a sweep. So Chicago, out west, feeling pretty good about themselves. Destroy Philly before Philly becomes Philly. They're on their way. There's pieces in place. Not all yet, but getting close. The Minnesota North Stars then knock out St. Louis in the first round, which is a huge upset. So after 3 straight Stanley Cup finals, the Blues are out in the first round against Minnesota. Yeah, we'll see that rivalry grow over the years. Semifinal, Montreal takes care of the Minnesota North Stars. So what happens is there's a crossover. So they basically cross over between teams to make sure that it's not just necessarily 2 Western teams in the final. It could be 2 Eastern teams in the final. Make it a little more fair. But again, the first round having Boston against Montreal, I would argue that's a little bit harder than Chicago getting Philly. Just kind of arguing that's still not necessarily a fair system. So Montreal beats Minnesota in 6. The Chicago Blackhawks play the New York Rangers, and Chicago wins that one in 7. Which wouldn't have necessarily been an upset because there's only a 2-loss difference between them, a 2-tie difference, and they have the same number of wins. It's an impressive run. Very impressive run for Chicago and the Rangers, and one of them had to go to the final and one of them had to go home. Chicago goes to the final, and what happens there? Well, Chicago wins both games at home. They win 2-1 in overtime in the first game, and they win 5-3 in the second game. Had to feel pretty good as they went to Montreal. Montreal wins 4-2 and 5-2 at home. No problem. Until you lose a game at home, you're okay. Game 5, Chicago wins at home a 2-0 shutout. Tony Esposito is going to get a Stanley Cup a year after Phil Esposito got a Stanley Cup. This is going to be amazing. Then Montreal, At home wins 4-3. No problem. You're going home for Game 7. Chicago loses Game 7 to the Montreal Canadiens 3-2. So Montreal wins the series in 7. Playoffs. Playoff goals, Frank Mahovlich leads the way with 14. Bobby Hull is next with 11. For playoff assists, Jean Beliveau with 16. Bobby Hull with 14. And for points in the playoffs, I'm pretty sure that requires a T. Yeah, close enough. Close enough. It doesn't matter if you guys can't see it. I can see it. It says points. Mahovlich, 27. Bobby Hull, 25. Not Brett. Brett's not in this yet. Yvon Cornway, 22. And Jean Beliveau, 22. For playoff wins, Ken Dryden gets 12, which is what you need for the Stanley Cup. And Tony Esposito gets, you got it, 11. So the Montreal Canadiens are back at the top again. Because it's kind of what they do. And they're just warming up because they just drafted this Guy Lafleur kid. So they're going to go on a nice long run again soon. But for 1971, they're the champs. We would see a resurfacing of Boston's Stanley Cup dreams in 1972, but we're not there yet. This is 1971. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I also want to throw in, for people who are wondering about me doing a series of videos on Legends of the Game, like a Guy Lafleur, like Stan Mikita, and all that other stuff. I intend to do a Legends series once I'm done. Either once I'm done the history, or as the history videos reach the modern era, then I may go back and I may do videos on the historical Legends of the Game. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys so much for all your support to get to this point. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. This has been the 1970-71 season, and once again, your champions, these guys. It's kind of what happens. I'll talk to you again soon.